I don't know what it is, but I sure love this place. There's a feeling here that I can't describe. And Bronco told him, well, it's the spirit.
Wow.
And Perry walked away, this tough, hard-nosed football Marine.
/Marine.
Walked away thinking, man, this is a spiritual experience.
My name is Mike Lacey, and we're here with Beyond the Game. And I am very, very grateful to have Marc Lyons, someone who I can probably attribute my life to, and I'll explain why in a second. But Marc, I know, that sounds funny, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Did you pull me out of the river?
No.
Okay.
I can't recall that.
I can't recall that one. But anyway, welcome to Beyond the Game. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
All right. Now, Marc has a history of playing football at BYU back in the 1960s. We'll talk about that, and that was very interesting. There's some interesting stories I bet you can tell us. But also why I was going to say he saved my life. I've lived in Northern California and New Mexico, with my family as we've raised our family. And frequently we were traveling between those two locations, or frequently, like between Farmington, New Mexico and St. George, Utah. And it's like we tried to schedule a trip when I could listen to the football game. And I just remember staying awake, listening to my beloved Cougars being explained by Paul James back then, or Greg Wrubell, in these later days. And Marc Lyons is the color guy. So, Marc, what does it mean to be a color commentator? What's that?
Well, Paul would say they made a great pass on that play, and I would say, good call, Paul. And then, but I try to interject a little bit of the football knowledge that I learned from playing the game and coaching the game. And in doing so, I tried to explain it as if I was explaining it to my wife. And that way I'd have an opportunity that maybe people would be understanding of what I was saying. And if you said, oh, they ran a twist on that last stunt, a lot of people aren't understanding what you're talking about.
Correct.
So I tried to put it into words and terminology that people would understand. And then I also tried to contribute a little bit of wit. And at one time I was witty, but I don't know, it went away.
My wit turns out to be more, they call it bad dad jokes. And so I think I'm really funny, but everyone kind of rolls their eyes when I do.
Well, I love what you're talking about because at KSL, we were a powerful radio station.
Yes.
And it was broadcast.
That's what I loved about KSL.
All over, everywhere. In fact, on our call-in shows, we got calls from Europe, and it was crazy that people would be listening to our broadcasts. The servicemen liked to listen to it. So we were able to reach a lot of people because of the volume that KSL has.
Especially at nighttime when they amped up or, increased the
voltage.
Whatever. I could in New Mexico, or whether it was in New Mexico or in Northern California, heard you clear as a bell.
Yeah, isn't that something?
It was amazing. So, back then, in the 1980s and the 1990s, that was high tech.
And there's a lot of people that liked listening to BYU football.
Still do.
Yeah, and so it reaches a large audience. Made it pretty fun.
Absolutely. So anyway, I think I avoided some of those wrecks. I was a little more awake because I was listening to Paul James and Marc Lyons.
Yeah.
And you kept me alive. Thank you.
Good, yeah. And Paul was great about it, and it was fun working with Paul. His voice had this inflection to it that just was exciting. And then Greg takes over, and Greg just has all of this at the tip of his fingertips, he's got all of these stats and numbers and things about people, and he's so good at recall. So those two guys were great to work with. And it was easy for me to sit back and say, go ahead and call this game. I'll have a sandwich.
Well, well, no, but as a color guy, I mean, it would be very boring as a consumer of radio sports to just hear the same voice all the time, despite the fact that Paul or Greg have really good voices to listen to. Right. So you would come in. What was your responsibility as the caller?
So BYU's playing Penn State. And I happened to notice Paul would call, they run left side, picks up 4 yards, and they would call his name and everybody in the tackle and all of that. Runs left side, and then later on runs left side. I said, Paul, I don't know if you are paying attention or not, but you're saying runs left side quite often. And he said, next play's up, they run left side. And he says, why are they doing that? And so I got to explain a little bit that usually their left tackle is their best lineman and they're having success. And so I have to try to create a little bit of stories that maybe were witty, but also identify some of the reasons things are happening on the field.
Mark, my question then is, did you come in prepared with some canned ideas, and had you studied bios and things, or was this mostly off the cuff?
Yeah, mostly it's you see it and you go ahead and call it. We watched a lot of film, so Paul and I did early in order to get our timing down and to get more familiar with each other, and so we'd watch a game film and call a play, and I'd get to respond to it. And so it helped us in preparing. But also, when we were going to play Oregon State this next week, well, we had an idea of what Oregon State does, and I could be more familiar with their personnel. And so,
and you can tell Paul, hey, that was off tackle or off guard, whether it was left side or whatever. No, I'm kidding.
So, yeah, there was a lot of preparation.
No doubt. It's interesting then that, Paul James, a guy that had been doing it for years and probably felt very comfortable, and I'm sure he did his individual homework on the numbers and the players, but it's interesting that you and he together would watch a film and practice your craft.
Yeah, and it was early in my opportunities to do this. I felt still as an outsider. I wasn't part
of
it.
You mean with Paul or with Paul, the whole broadcasting crew?
With the broadcasting idea, So when I was in high school, I called Little League baseball games at the baseball park, and so that's where I might have gotten a little bit of feeling that, hey, this is pretty fun. I loved BYU. I just loved BYU and BYU football. And for me to have an opportunity to continue to have a part in being with BYU, that's why I was so excited to be the color guy. And I followed Virgil Carter on the football field. He was the quarterback before I was the quarterback. And he was then in the booth before I went in the booth. So he had been the color guy with Paul, and I followed him there. So I still felt as though this is Paul's gig, and I'm just going to be like, I'm just the coloring on the wall. But after we did this, where we would watch film together and I'd explain what formations were, and we would get a little bit more familiar with each other, it really helped us in our broadcast.
He was comfortable with you coming in. Did you have to interrupt him, or would he pause and you knew to come in?
Yeah, if we got a pause, I had a chance to say something.
But that might have been very infrequent. I don't know.
Well, we did set up a system that if I had something important to say, I touched his wrist, because we sat next to each other in the booth, and I would touch his wrist, and he said, I'll let you talk. I'll let you do it. Because it was too hard for me to say, 4 plays ago, Paul, this thing happened. It was impossible to go back.
True.
So, we became much closer. Our wives became friends, and we became friends. And in doing that, in fact, I'm going to UNLV, And so I check into the hotel, and I get in. The game's tonight, or the night I'm checking in. So we're playing that night. And I go to my room and open the door. Paul's asleep in my bed. I'm saying,
What?
Paul said, I got here a little early and I needed a nap. I told him I was you, and they put me in here.
Well, why wasn't he in his own room?
He didn't stay the night. So because the game ended that night, Paul frequently
going back.
went. Yeah, he
Oh, for
left.
basketball?
Well, for his, he was the Channel 5 sports guy.
That's right.
And so it cracked me up that there's Paul sleeping in my bed.
Well, at least it was warm when you crawled out. That's funny. I remember Paul James and his unique voice. When did he pass?
Well, that's hard.
I think I read that it was 2018.
I'm thinking that's probably in that neighborhood. Yeah,
Okay.
I think I was going to say 5 to 8 years ago.
So just to put a cap on your broadcasting, I saw that you started in 1980, which was the year of the Miracle Bowl.
Yeah, but it was also BYU lost to New Mexico in the opening game, and I thought I was the Hex. Oh, that was my first
I think
game.
you were. I think you were. I have another story about that, though.
Okay.
The other hex that we had is, I've probably told this before, but we had a wonderful, he became one of the best offensive line coaches that BYU had. But Roger French came in late that year. I forget where he was coaching. I think Jim Herman told me the story because Jim, I think that Roger French had been at Minnesota. And then LaVell hired him, but Roger arrived 1 or 2 weeks late. And so I remember, this is my junior year at BYU, that Roger French was living in his camper.
That's right. Yeah.
At the BYU parking lot. We'd already started practices 2 weeks earlier, but the offensive line didn't have any of its, or I shouldn't say any, had very few of its protection packages in. And so, New Mexico was running.
Came with everything.
Well, I mean, who was that great defensive coach that New Mexico had that year?
Yeah.
He ended up coaching at South Carolina, but he was kind of he was Bronco Mendenhall before Bronco Mendenhall.
Yeah, right.
He ran so many stunts and crazy defenses.
He did. And
Go
I'll
ahead.
add another story.
Yeah.
So I'm coaching at Olympus, and I'm watching all these stunts that they're doing, all these blitzes, and I'm writing them down. I go back home. We put them all in the next week.
Oh.
And poor Roy High School just got murdered because they weren't ready at all for any of that. And so, yeah, it was exactly the problem is that BYU got blitzed.
Yeah.
You know, they put one drive together, and it looked like, okay, they've got this figured out. They went with no huddle for a little bit and hoping to reduce the number of calls that they could get on the defense. Put together a drive, and it looked like they were going to turn it around, but ended up losing.
It was the perfect storm against BYU and for New Mexico. New Mexico, it's interesting, I think ended up losing only one game that season and one game the next season, but they didn't get into a bowl game. Oh. We had the ranking and credibility already.
You won the rest. BYU won the rest of the season. Yeah, they won the rest of the game.
And we shouldn't have lost that game. Yeah. And it's not Roger French's fault. Roger came and tried to do all he could, but we didn't have the offensive line or offensive backs coordinated to protect against
the
those
rest
blitzes.
Of the story. That's good.
Paul James, well, not Paul James, Paul Harvey.
Paul Harvey.
And the rest of the story.
That was it. Good. Good to know.
So anyway, that you were there, and what a disappointing game.
Yeah.
Because we were truly looking forward to an unbelievably good season. It ended up being an unbelievably good season, but that one hiccup at the and still New Mexico needed some almost miraculous plays to come out with that victory, but hey, they deserve the win. Anyway, that's really, now you expressed something or said something that's interesting to me, because here you are, the color guy for BYU football, and you were coaching. You were a head coach at
Olympus High School.
At Olympus High School. How are you the head football coach at Olympus High School and traveling to BYU away games?
It was a tough thing to do. We would play our games Friday nights, of course, and there were very few Friday night games in the college level.
ESPN hadn't really set up those Friday night televised games.
There was I thought this anyway, there was some kind of deal that if the colleges were playing Friday night, it would interfere with the attendance at high school games.
True.
And so I would catch Saturday morning, I'd catch a flight to wherever that next game was and fly home usually right after that game, because we had to break down film and get prepped for our practices the next week at Olympus. So the Hawaii game was a challenge. And, everybody thinks, oh, man, you get to go to Hawaii. And
yeah, for 8 hours.
I flew went straight to the state. No, maybe I got a Wendy's burger, went straight to the stadium, called the game, got that early morning flight the next day to get home in order to prepare for our next high school week's game. And but it was fun.
I don't know how you did that. I know it would have been fun.
And like I was expressing, we put in those stunts. I learned a lot of trick plays that I had seen. A great fake field goal. In fact, I shouldn't say this out. Well, I will. Colorado, we put in a fake field goal, and Colorado was recruiting one of our players. And so I'd given him our game film that included one of our fake field goals. And that worked. And so the kid they were recruiting didn't end up going to Colorado, but BYU played Colorado in a bowl game in Los Angeles that year. And that year, they ran the same fake field goal against, and I'm saying, Paul, that's my play. How did they get my play? And Paul was wondering, what are you talking about?
Yeah, what are you talking about? That's interesting.
So that was, so there was, I got a lot from watching the football that I did and seeing all those other teams, and they got a little bit from me.
Were you a full-time teacher at Olympus also?
I was. Yeah, like I say, it was a busy, good time. Both my parents were high school teachers, and both said, you probably don't want to do this. And my dad was a coach, and that's what I wanted to do, and it was a great life.
Being a football coach requires tons of time. I mean, you're out there with that team in the preseason and during the season, and sometimes practices can kind of drag on for a lot of time. I mean, I can't imagine your schedule. Were you a business teacher? What did you teach at school?
I taught, I was a marketing graduate and went back and taught a marketing class in high school. And it was good. It was fun. I didn't use a textbook. I got to use what's going on in the world every day, and had an opportunity to point out different things that were going on. And some of my students became very successful business people. And so that was great. And then the other reward you get is you run into those football players and they come up and say, dang, coach, thanks for being my coach, and it was a fun time. We had a little fun when we were as a coach. I stole some stuff from another book that I read. And
you mean plays or strategies?
Well, the way they call them, I'm trying to remember who it was. I wish I would have looked it up beforehand. But we had a play called Mudcat Up the River, and that was quarterback sneak. But if you call it quarterback sneak, but Mudcat Up the River, those guys couldn't wait to get Mudcat up the river. And it was wagon train right, and that would be the sweep. And we did number our pass plays, but it created a little bit of fun. When you're talking about the practices dragging on, I feel, this is my feeling, Utah's struggling right now. And I think...
You mean the University of Utah?
University of Utah.
Right.
It appears to me...
And by the way, we're taping this the week after Utah now has lost 3 games in a row. They just lost to TCU, and they fired their offensive coordinator. So, yes, Utah, who was expected to be first in the Big 12, had been prognosticated.
Yeah.
They're struggling, due to injuries, all sorts of things. But anyway, go ahead. They're struggling.
I feel that they are tired of practice. Did you ever get that way?
Oh, of course.
You get into the halfway to the 3/4 of the season, and the practice schedule is the same, and you go out there and you're going to repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. The repetition creates memory, and it gets tiring. And so I enjoyed that we had an opportunity. We had a formation called Big Slot Lizard, and we ran 2 different plays out of it all. But the kids go, "What's Big Slot Lizard?" Yeah,
You'll never forget it.
And then we had a lineman come in motion on that play, and so they had a lot of fun. I think that helps break up some of that boredom of the repetition of practice.
Good for you. So you created some fun names to keep the kids engaged. And once you have a strange name like that, it really is hard to forget. I mean, everybody will remember.
Yeah, I'm sure they remember Big Slot Lizard.
We were talking in the past about Doug Scoville in our offense, and the pass offense. It was so intricate and yet so simple. It was a very complex offense when you really looked at it from 30,000 feet. But when you looked at every series of pass play, and so, you had Brown right, 43 left, and you had the formation, you had the play, and then on which hut, and our system for calling an audible was interesting, because if it was Brown right 43 on 2, and then if Mark Wilson steps up to the line and says, 240, and then the next number, if he yells the number of the snap count, that meant that you're going to have an audible on the next one. And so,
or if you called 4, that's a fake audible.
Yeah. Or he'll say 57, and so you knew that it wasn't an audible. But yeah, he'd call some number every time on the first one. But if it was the snap count number, the next play is an audible, and you always went on 1 on the audible. So I don't know where that came from, but you were a quarterback. Was that kind of how you guys called audibles too?
We had live colors, and so we would have say, well, if you're just saying brown or yellow or something easy, we wouldn't use yellow, red. Usually one quick blue, something I could call out rather easily. But then if I use chartreuse or, any other color. So we'd have 2 live colors on game day, and then every other color was dead.
Fake.
Yeah. And so it helped to have a false audible so that the teams couldn't react exactly to what you were calling out.
We could go so many different places, because you as a quarterback, being a head coach, what kind of offense did you run at Olympus?
Yeah, well, we ran belly series when I was a player at BYU when I got there.
So let me explain. The belly series is more of an option where the quarterback holds the ball. Now they call an RPO, which is a run-pass option. And so the quarterback is holding the ball in usually the stomach of the fullback and then reading a player, maybe the defensive end or usually the defensive end, sometimes the linebacker. And depending on what that player does, he'll either give the ball to the fullback or pull it back out and do his own run.
And John Ogden was our fullback, and John Ogden
at Olympus.
No.
At BYU. You were doing the belly at BYU.
John Ogden didn't lose a yard in all of his runs at BYU.
Wow.
Yeah. So he was a perfect kind of back to put it in his belly and ride him in.
Would you call him a fullback?
Yeah.
Okay.
And Virgil Carter was so quick and so smart. And
did he run the belly series
he did,
also?
yeah.
Okay.
And he would put it in John's belly and pull it out and be around that end and running for his life. But it was good. So I was running my belly series, and I don't know. They timed me with a calendar, and I think that we got away from that a little bit. But we started out with belly series, but soon it was too much. We went to the spread. It was the newest thing going on, and BYU was killing people with throwing the football. And so we just decided we're going to hang our hat on having a little fun and throwing the ball around.
Good for you. And that's what you did at Olympus.
Yeah, that's what we did at Olympus.
Well, tell me, stepping back one more time, Virgil Carter. See, I played at Cordova High School in Northern California. And my head coach, our school district was or probably still is, the Folsom Cordova School District. And Dewey Guerra, my head coach, was the coach at Folsom High School when Virgil Carter played high school football. So he coached Virgil Carter. My coach wasn't that excited about me going to BYU. He'd rather have had me go to Stanford or Cal, other Northern California schools. But I was excited to go to BYU, and Virgil Carter had been there. So anyway, Dewey Guerra, my coach, talked about Virgil Carter, and Virgil Carter didn't he play in the NFL for a little while?
He did, yeah, oh yeah. He played for the Chicago Bears and handed off to Gale Sayers. There was a fun story there. His wife, they scripted about the first 10 plays. So scripting, they prepared in their practices the first 10 plays they were going to run in the game.
You're talking about the offensive coordinator.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so Judy, Virgil's wife, she went through the plays with him so he would know the order of what he was doing. So she helped him memorize them.
Interesting.
Well, she's up in the stands, and she was saying, they're going to give it to Sayers. They always give it to Sayers first down. Sayers carries the football, and then, this time, watch, they're going to do something different. I bet they run the reverse. Finally, everybody in the stands is looking around, who is this woman? How does she know everything going on?
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. So then Virgil got traded to Cincinnati, and they went to the Super Bowl, or at least to the playoffs. I can't remember. And I was so shocked when they asked, oh, brother, this is long enough ago. I can't remember who was coaching them at the time. Said, what are you going to get? You're a failure if you lose the Super Bowl. You make it to the Super Bowl, but if you lose, you were so bad that time. And they said, what are you going to look for in the draft? And he said, I think we need a quarterback. And so that made me feel bad because Virgil was a good quarterback. He did a good job.
Well, that's very interesting. And then one of my years, my first year playing back after my mission and redshirt year, Virgil Carter was the color man with Paul James.
Right.
And I remember him approaching me on the bus in Houston, Texas, talking about Costa Rica. And he at the time was interested in maybe adopting children down there or a child, and knew that I served a mission down there and spoke Spanish. So he asked me if I would translate for him. It ended up not ever happening, but it was interesting to meet him. And I don't know how many years he was the color guy, but then you came in right after him because that was 1979 and your first year was 1980.
1980, yeah. Norm Chow did something I talked him into. So Norm Chow was BYU's offensive coordinator, and Paul James would go to him and get, what's the opening play? What are you going to start with? And Norm would tell him the play. And Paul would always start off in his, well, here they go. Do you think they're going to start with a run or a pass? I bet they run that play action pass. And there it goes. So I told Norm, give him the wrong play. And so Paul's calling the play, and I said, no, Paul, I bet they run the dive today. And, it's the dive.
Ooh,
Yeah, I know.
you probably got in trouble for
I don't know.
outshining the play-by-play
I don't
guy.
know if I ever told Paul that really happened that way.
That's funny. That's really good. Gary Scheide was right after you, and the story for me was that you played,
7, 8, and 9.
67, 68, and 69. Virgil Carter was right before you. And then Gary Scheide came in 1970, I assume.
Well, there were 2 dark years. Well, probably we should count my senior year as a dark year too, where they had, I think, Brian Gunderson, and no, it wasn't then, but Scheide came in 72.
And I remember Gary Scheide leading as quarterback in the bowl game. 1974 was that fall was my senior year. And so I was watching BYU in the, back then, the Fiesta Bowl.
Right.
And play against, I think, Oklahoma or Oklahoma State. That's correct.
Yeah.
And he got injured in that game.
Yeah, he did.
But anyway.
And then Giles came in, Mark Giles. Yeah.
And it's interesting, my freshman year, 1975, the fall of 1975, Mark Giles was the starting quarterback for a couple of games. And then Jeff Duva came in for 1 or 2 games. And finally, Gifford Nielsen came in, and the rest is history.
Yeah, right.
But isn't it interesting? How do you feel being part of that succession of quarterbacks, or succession, I should say, of quarterbacks?
Well, I don't think I made the poster.
Oh, come on.
I do enjoy that Gifford Nielsen would come up. He was in high school or even younger than that when I was playing. And he was over there asking us after practice, "Can I have your chin strap?" And he would, he was a gym rat.
Wow.
And just liked it. And he was over there. And so I got to know Gifford a little bit and went over and watched Provo play and was excited for him.
Was he tall then too?
He was tall, yeah. And so I kind of followed him from that youth through that series to get to BYU. And then, he was a dandy.
Well, I've always felt grateful that my freshman year, 1975, I come in. We're converts to the church. BYU was new to me. I hadn't been to Utah very much at all, so this was new. And his locker was right to my right, and so he and I became friends, and still, I remember Gifford Nielsen and what a great man he was. Now, there was one more thing, actually 2 more things. One, I've heard, and was Tommy Hudspeth your head coach at BYU?
He was.
All right. So I've heard that it was kind of a cultural clash maybe, but Tommy Hudspeth, I'm not sure if he was a member of the church or not.
He was.
He was. But he brought in a bunch of Marines to play football for BYU. How did that work out? Were you there?
I was there, yeah. So I was a freshman in 65, and the Marines came in 65.
So they invaded BYU. And did they take the beachhead, or what happened?
Well, Phil Odell did. Phil
Odell was one of the Marines?
He is. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Casey Boyette. I think I can get all 7 of them. Max Newberry and Paul Ehrman. Williams. There were 7. Oh, Dick Banke. Oh, man. Dick Banke was a mean, tough defensive lineman. Oh, man.
Is this why Tommy Hudspeth brought in the Marines?
I think it was it was the portal at the time.
Yeah.
It was the portal.
That's interesting.
He got this opportunity to bring in these players who had been playing together. They knew the game. They were mature. And, boy, they did have us freshmen stand at attention. They were in charge.
Let me ask a question, because these guys had been in the military.
They had.
And so being in the military, I think then you talk about this being the portal, but That's almost like being on a mission that you're losing years of eligibility.
Yeah.
Is that right?
So I'll give you an example. Perry Rodriguez was a good running back, tough son of a gun. And Perry came back. So he played. They were successful. They won the first conference championship in 1965, the year they came in. Phil and Casey were great receivers. And Perry was a great running back, and Virgil was in charge. And two offensive linemen, two defensive players. And
that were part of this Marine group.
That's group, yeah.
Right.
And so when they came in, Perry, like I say, he and Tommy got together. They were buddies, and Tommy watched over him and made sure he stayed in line. But Perry came back to one of those reunions that we had. First conference championship was 1965, and so Perry came back, and Perry.
So in 1965
was the first season.
This year we're celebrating 100 years of BYU football. So apparently, 1924 was the first year of BYU football. So from 1924 to 1965. No conference. Think about that. That's a huge accomplishment. So I apologize for interrupting you, but.
So Perry came back and he says, I don't know what it is. He was talking with Bronco
Mendenhall.
Mm-hmm. I don't know what it is, but I sure love this place. There's a feeling here that I can't describe. And Bronco told him, well, it's the Spirit.
Wow.
And Perry walked away, this tough, hard-nosed football Marine.
Marine.
Walked away thinking, man, this is a spiritual experience. Yeah, it was pretty neat. So Phil Odell was awesome, just great. He joined the church later on, he and his wife. His daughter still had some things to do with BYU football. Casey Boyette was a loosey-goosey guy, but a good receiver. We're playing Arizona State, and we're down in the game, and Casey's broken free on a long ball. He catches it. He's about the 50-yard line, makes one cut to the inside, and slips and falls. And he stays on the ground. And Tommy, surprisingly, he's out there in a hurry to go out there and see if Casey's hurt. And he said to Casey, Casey, are you okay? And Casey looked up and said, I'm okay, Coach, but how are the fans taking it?
That he slipped?
And Tommy turns his head away and looks up in the air as he walks back off the field.
Rolling his eyes.
Yeah, Casey was a good one.
Well, I'm trying to remember Frank Kush was the head coach at Arizona State, and he was known for being a tough-nosed, hard-nosed football coach. The way the Woody Hayes of the world were, the way football was.
Yeah, I talked to one of their players, and they had a camp that they went to where there was no supervision, and nobody knew what was going on, and he would deny everything. But it was quite an eye-opener for those players.
So was in your opinion, Frank Kush, what I've read about him, he was pretty hard-nosed, pretty tough guy.
Yeah.
And now your head coach was Tommy Hudspeth. Was he out of that mold, or
Tommy was Tommy expected a lot.
Uh-huh.
And so Phil, we're beating San Jose by a lot. Tommy told me no more passes. And Phil comes back to the huddle and says, Mark, this kid over here is giving me so much crap. I can't take it. Throw me the bomb. Tommy said, no more passes. And he says, I'll take care of Tommy.
Yeah, right.
So this is that Marine relationship with the coach, I think. Throw the bomb, catches it, scores a touchdown. Phil holds the ball up in this kid's face. Throws the ball up in the stands. And I don't know. It was a lot to a little. We beat him by a lot. And so I'm humbly going back to the sideline, waiting.
Going back towards the head coach.
Phil. And Phil got there in front and told him I was okay. I just went over to sat down on the bench.
That reminds me of the story Royce Bybee told us, because I remember this exactly as it happened. I think we were playing UTEP. I think he said it was someone else, but it was one of those games where we were winning by a lot at home. And Royce got to play quite a bit of the third, fourth quarters when Jim McMahon and the rest of the offense had run up the score, so to speak. And so Royce, I remember that Doug Scoville, our offensive coordinator, had put in a particular audible if the quarterback saw the strong safety do something. I don't know what it was. Royce saw that strong safety do that something. So we were already ahead, and LaVell was very careful.
Yeah, he tried to be. Yeah,
he tried,
did.
But with Doug Scoville, it was hard to.
That's the truth. He had to talk to Doug a lot about that.
It was, as a player on the team, we used to love those interactions. But anyway, Royce told the story just like you of, he called the audible, threw a touchdown. We were already, I think we scored like 65 points that game, and LaVell wasn't very happy. It was Doug Scoville, says, when Royce came off, from the field, Doug said, "Go hide. LaVell's going to be after you." So anyway, that's interesting as a quarterback, doing what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And getting a little bit in trouble for it. That's funny.
LaVell was so great. And those call-in shows afterwards, that I know he just hated those call-in shows. Oh, man. But he would come in, he'd have his sandwich, and he'd be chewing and stopping for a second to answer the next question, roll his eyes.
But this is on radio, so no one sees that.
But he got mad at me one time. It was a cold, rainy day. And he came, and the crowd didn't show up. We didn't have, wasn't the sellout for sure.
Really?
And he was disappointed that we didn't get the following he expected. And he talked to me, and he said, "I heard you say in your pregame, this is a good day to stay home." I said, "Coach, I didn't say that. I don't know where." And I think he and one of the people back in the studio of KSL said something like that. And I said, "You're going to have fun coming out today no matter what." And somehow he thinks all of those words came from me. And I was pretty crushed that he thought that I was the one that maybe. So I finally said to him, "No, Coach, if people stayed away because of something I said, I'd be pretty impressed about that." I don't know how much they listened to me.
We had Dick Harmon here. And Dick and his wife ended up becoming, and I think already were, well respected with Patty and LaVell. And Patty worked with Dick in the media of, I don't know, I think the Daily Herald back then. And Dick told the story of, I think these were the years when Norm Chow was just working his way up as an offensive coordinator. And there was a little bit of a learning curve. And so the fans were getting frustrated that, our offense is not as efficient. Is not as efficient as we're used to it. But I mean, I forget I think he followed Doug Scoville, Ted Tollner, Mike Holmgren, and now he's working his way up. And I mean, the rest is history, because Norm did a phenomenal job.
Yeah.
But there's a learning curve. There's some time where you have to learn how to call those plays.
Absolutely.
And the LaVell was always protective of his people. And I think Dick told us about, he was golfing with LaVell, and Dick just brought up a side question like, "Well, how are you feeling about Norm Chow?" And right at that moment, Dick said, "All right, I'm trading golf carts." And Dick told the rest of the story that LaVell didn't hold a grudge. He wasn't upset for very long, but he didn't want to hear that question. I thought that was interesting.
He was super, so amazing in that he and Patty both knew my wife's name 10 years afterwards when we were at one of those functions. It was just remarkable that he kept up to date with all those old players. We did a segment one time in a post game that people would call in an old player, and he would be able to identify what that guy was doing now. It was amazing.
LaVell had a gift for that.
Yeah.
He had a true gift. Mark, it has been a joy visiting with you. It's really enjoyable for me and maybe a lot of other BYU fans to hear your voice because, over all those airwaves for all those years, we heard you with Paul James, with Greg Wrubell. You just did football, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I did. Yeah, there was a shot at basketball. I did one game, and then you're out of here.
He's dribbling to the left. Well, Mark, how would you like to finish our conversation? What thoughts do you have today?
Well, first of all, thank you for the chance to reminisce and recall some of those great times that we've had, and for me to express a couple stories. There's a couple million more.
We didn't get to talk about the Wyoming 14.
Oh, that's right.
But that's a pretty deep story, and hopefully we can visit some other time because
right.
I'd like to go into more depth, and so someday that'd be interesting because you were there on the field.
I was,
and that was an interesting time in BYU and LDS Church history.
Yeah, right. Well, good. Yeah, and so again, I just loved BYU. I went there as a non-member, had an opportunity to learn and join the church, which I did, and my family are members, and I just am so appreciative of all that I learned and did at BYU, and the chance to have been quarterback there. I still just marvel at it. The game's so different today, and the chance to then have an opportunity to be part of BYU through broadcasting. It was a highlight of my life.
Do you still get to attend any of the games?
Oh yeah, I'm learning to be a fan.
I'm gonna knock on wood. I don't want to be the guy guilty of any jinxes or anything, but at this time BYU is 7-0. We had that wonderful comeback against Oklahoma State this past weekend, and my heavens, I mean. What made me so excited, because you've seen Jake Retzlaff last year to this year, Retzlaff.
Yeah.
You've seen him from last year to this year. I think one of the best things that could have happened, because sometimes it feels like the coaching staff has been a little nervous to open up the passing game for him because we had some frustrations last year. And at the end of that game, no holds barred. We had to go for it.
That final throw for that touchdown was such a remarkable pass. There's a lot of people. There's a lot of congestion, and he gets it while that defensive back's eyes are away from him. He throws a rocket and puts it right on the numbers. Yeah, that was a spectacular play.
And then Darius Lassiter just made the most, because think about it. I mean, there were only 10 seconds left once he scored.
Yeah.
And if he had been tackled at the 5-yard line, it's still probably less than 50% likely that we scored.
One play, yeah. And he made 3 guys miss. Looked silly at it, too. Yeah. And the thing I liked in his postgame, he said something, I've been working on my after touchdown dances.
Oh, gee.
And I thought, yeah, they need some work.
But his juke on that one guy was a very, very effective juke.
Yeah.
Well, it's so fun to reminisce about these things. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks.
And thanks for all that you've done with BYU football and with Olympus and everybody else.
It's been a good life. Thank you.
Thank you for watching another episode of Beyond the Game. Remember to click here to subscribe and click here to watch our recent videos. Also, please follow us on social media. And remember, go Cougs.